Because this has been billed as a big decision week for Boris Johnson. One of those decisions was about allowing the Chinese telecoms firm Huawei involvement in terms of rolling out 5G network here. We've just had the written ministerial statement. This is from Baroness Morgan, who will be giving an oral statement in the Lords this afternoon. Slightly unusual, of course, but she is the cabinet minister responsible. We have it here. Huawei isn't actually mentioned by name in the release, but it does say and talk about sort of new plans to safeguard the country's telecoms network, and this is in preparation for fast, reliable and secure connectivity. But there are all sorts of exclusions. Tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is all in the backdrop of quite a public row that's been going on about this for some time now. In fact, we saw Gavin Williams lose his job over it when it initially leaked that this was what the government was considering doing. And there's been a lot of sort of mood music around it over the last couple of weeks. And of course, we've seen various interventions from the United States who are very concerned about this and have even threatened to limit our intelligence sharing if we were to go ahead with this. So it's interesting to see such a detailed response from the government, and they've been very clear to set out some of the exclusions and the limited nature by which Huawei will have a role in this. They're going to be excluded from all safety-related and safety-critical networks in critical infrastructure. They're going to be excluded from security-critical network functions and limited to a minority presence in other network functions to a cap of up to 35%. Also, they're going to be subject to tight restrictions, including exclusions from sensitive geographic areas. So I presume we're talking about, nuclear power stations and those type. So they've been very clear to say that. And interesting, in this statement as well, they say nothing in the review's conclusions affect this country's ability to share highly sensitive intelligence data over highly secure networks. So obviously a nod to the United States that they shouldn't be concerned about this.
And Mike Pompeo, of course, is here tomorrow, the US Secretary of State, and they are very against it. Does all of that reassure you?
It's getting there. The first duty of any Prime Minister is to keep the nation safe. You become Prime Minister, you walk into 10 Downing Street, you get taken away by the National Security Advisor, and you go through all the threats that we face. And this has now moved very much over to the digital platform. I hope the decision today will provide more details. We'll hear it this afternoon. The level, the limits in which Huawei will be able to be involved in Britain. And you've mentioned it already. It will be capped to the non-critical infrastructure itself. We're at a dilemma. The Huawei itself, the biggest telecoms company in the world, able to produce high-tech but cheap kit. We want to remain competitive.
Sure.
And therefore, so we have to work out how we can include them, but ensure we keep the country safe.
Right. But, I mean, there was a queue of backbenchers yesterday, interestingly, really, from the Tory side, who are dead against it. They're not just sort of equivocating in the way you are. They are dead against it. They see it as a real risk. How big a problem is this?
I echo these concerns. This is a company that's obliged by its host nation to spy on its own people, to put in surveillance equipment inside, embedded in what it does.
So is this a mistake, then?
And, well, no, what you need to make sure is that that isn't utilised in the UK. What I would like to see, bearing in mind that the kit that they now have that we require, let's have a Western capability, a Five Eyes capability. We produced an F-35, a stealth aircraft, through the Five Eyes community.
Sure.
Let's provide something that competes with Huawei. So I would put a cap on a number of years that Huawei can actually operate in this country, and let's develop our own 5G networks for the future.
Alan?
I'm very sceptical on this, I have to say, and this statement's just weird altogether, and I'm still getting used to how the Commons works, but for this to be announced in the unelected House of Lords rather than the House of Commons seems strange to me. It's an intention to legislate, but it doesn't tell us what's going to be in the legislation. It admits that there's a case to answer specifically on Huawei and that it's being excluded from some parts. So why not all of it? Why not some others? Huawei is not a regular corporation in the way that we'd understand it here. It is an emanation of the Chinese state. And I am concerned about the extent to which the Chinese state is using its economic heft to get into areas which I'm, as I say, sceptical about. And I just don't think this is the end of the story for a second.
It will be announced in the Commons, of course, this afternoon. But yes, so you're sceptical.
Well, I mean, I think the Prime Minister's boxed himself into a corner a bit, because if he was to back out now, the cost would be significant, and, his only wriggle room really is to add these kind of restrictions. But of course, whatever they put in place, there'll be software updates to the hardware that they control, and there are possibilities of security risks in the future coming with that. I think, it's very sad that we can't provide this kit ourselves, that there aren't the skills and the people in this country to do it. it. And I think part of the Prime Minister's industrial strategy has to be making sure we've got the skills. But, again, the Prime Minister doesn't come to the dispatch box to explain his decisions because he knows it's a tricky one, so he wriggles out, lets somebody else do it instead.
Well, no, it's quite right that the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport leads on this. The Prime Minister led the National Security Council. I agree with you there. We need to expedite our own capabilities. Let's not forget why Huawei is so ahead, because it's been pump-primed by a state, by a communist state, that's allowed this company, along with Tencent, Alibaba and China Communications, they have rallied ahead compared with British and American companies. We need to work together, not just point to Cisco or to Ericsson or Nokia and say, produce the goods, but actually collaboratively create something which can take over and be reliant. Because where China goes in the next 10 years, I actually envisage the splitting of the internet because of the rules that China is imposing on its own systems.
Right, what sort of rupture could this cause between the UK and the US?
Well, I think we'll start to see that quite soon because we've got the Secretary of State in town tomorrow and we've already heard lots of other sort of noising off already on this particular issue. And of course, it's worth thinking about the trade deal that is really being heralded as the sort of future for our sort of post-Brexit relationships and partnerships outside the UK. And of course, that's one of the things that is going to be of most concern to this government, that is that we haven't done something which is going to really upset Donald Trump. There's been suggestions he may make his own personal intervention on this later on in the week. So we'll have to see how far it goes.
Right, Boris Johnson not being dictated to, I should say, by Washington. You must be pleased with the bullish frame of mind.
No, I despair for the UK and where it's going, and I say that as a friend of the UK, much as I want to see Scotland independent. I mean, look, this is a microcosm of the dilemma that the UK is going to have. There's going to be three models of internet governance going forward. There's going to be the US model, which is corporation-led, the EU model, which is citizen-centred, or the Chinese model, which is authoritarian. We need to pick a side here. And the UK on its own, I absolutely agree with Tobias, we need to upskill our technology, but I think doing that on an EU level, however we interact with the EU going forward, and I accept Brexit's happening.
But the UK is leaving the EU, and that's the point. They've made that decision.
We wanted into the EU debate. Unfortunately, when you look at the Galileo system, we wanted to participate in that, and France is keeping us out. The GPS, the American equivalent, will actually be overtaken by the Beidou system, which is Chinese, in the next 10 to 15 years. This is the direction of travel where we're going. This is a concern I have. Not today, the security implications today, which the wise people around the room have said nothing to see here. It's what happens in 10 years' time, where China will take its own capabilities and technologies.
Do you see this as a trade-off? I mean, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings are reported to have sort of said, we'll take a hit on the trade deal with the US because we want the UK to become a high-tech country. We're striking out on our own.
I think with this decision, they don't really have much choice because of the cost. The Huawei, the Science Technology Committee looked at the technology itself last year and said it's fine, it's quite basic, but that's why it's so cheap. They're going to have to pay a lot if they don't go ahead with Huawei in some form. So I think it's more a case of they're boxed into a corner and they've made the decision that they had to make, and that's a shame. And I think there are voices in part from the backbench Tories who are standing to be the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. There's quite a lot of noise from those contenders, but these are real and very significant security issues that need looking at in a much bigger way than just about one deal and what we do over the immediate future. This is about the future of our country and some very difficult decisions to make as we leave Europe, as you point out. Who are we going to be siding with? Who are we going to be partnering with to make sure we've got the technology we need to be economically viable in the future? And as many MPs said in Parliament yesterday, a lot of areas haven't got 4G, let alone 5G. So, I mean, we're kind of way behind the curve on all of this stuff.
All right, we're going to talk about another big decision, and that's on immigration.